I ever met you, Rabbi Yitz, was as a senior rabbinical school student at the Jewish Theological Seminary, where on behalf of CLAL, you were hosting a retreat for soon-to-be rabbis. And my strongest memory was a conversation with you about your father and his courage on taking on the kosher
mafia kingpin
market, which was an act of physical courage, and how that had informed your own courage as a rabbinic leader in so much of what you have done throughout your career. And so it's with great privilege that we have this opportunity to join you in Jerusalem and to gain from you your experience and your perspective. So let's begin with where you're at. Tell us about what it has been for you and for Blue to be in Jerusalem amidst this horror.
It's, of course, a difficult time now in Israel. There's a paradox here. We live in Jerusalem, and the truth is, for Jerusalem, life is close to normal. We've had 2 air raid sirens that drove us into the safe rooms, the so-called mamad that each home must be built with, and catch rockets. But the rockets were knocked down by Iron Dome, and again, it's quite amazing to live through and hear it and see it. You hear loud booms and you see the entrails in the sky, and then you realize what's happened here. It's amazing. And again, Israeli science and physics and electrical, creativity that has, one takes it for granted, but it's quite astounding when you think about it. Anyway, so on the personal level of physical safety, Jerusalem is really not anything like the reality in the South, where there has been this horrific massacre and breaking up of the destruction of many homes in many places, and the loss of lives and the abductions and the wounded. It's really quite a shocking moment in the history of this people. Except, let me just get to the heart of the issue, because people pointed out, and it's been in the papers I see all day today also, more Jews were killed in one day by the Hamas terrorists on Saturday and Sunday than any single day since the Holocaust. And if one looks back at 6 million people, but that took 5 years mostly, so you're talking 2,000-3,000 people a day, and that's pretty close to what happened. Here, the difference, of course, is, and this is all the difference in the world, the difference is that we have the state of Israel, and what made the Holocaust possible more than anything else was Jewish powerlessness. The Jews could not help themselves. The Jews were trapped, and neither the Allies nor the neighbors helped. When they did, they saved Jews. It's just that very few did so. The big change then that we're living through is that you can do this for a day or 2. And some people, again, were confused, saying, well, after the Holocaust, we have Israel, and the Israeli jets fly over Auschwitz, and they'll never do it, never again. But it's not that simple. Jewish power means that we can defend ourselves. Jewish power means that we have a say in our own fate. This is not an absolute power. It never has been. And in the case of Israel, its right to exist has been challenged since the first day when, in 1948 and 1947, when the UN voted to set up authorized two states, one Jewish, one Arab, Palestinian. And instead of setting up a second Palestinian state, the Arab nations invaded Israel and tried to destroy it. So this is not anything new. On the other hand, as I say, this is the big change. And the truth is 2 days of fighting, 3 days of fighting. And Israel has pretty much liquidated or neutralized the 1,000 or so terrorists who invaded successfully and who killed so many people. So that is a big change. I have to only add one more comment, and that's part of the sadness of this moment also. not only the terrible loss of life, but in the counterattack. The IDF reported today that they have lost 123 soldiers. Some of them, many of them were killed in that first day because they were not prepared. But this morning I attended a funeral of our granddaughter's boyfriend. They were about to be engaged, he's in the Israeli Okitz Corps, which is, they use the dogs, and they sniff out and was searching for terrorists house by house, and they tried to recapture Kfar Aza, which is a nearby settlement, Gaza, and he was killed in the firefight. And my brother reported to me this morning that his great-grandson was also killed in the fighting in the south. So there's going to be a heavy price. I want to say just straight as I can. I have utmost confidence that despite the failures, they have to be investigated. Despite the surprise attack and successful, I have no doubt in my mind that Israel is strong enough to recapture, not only recapture, but now to do what it should have done, or maybe would have done in the past 20 years, which is to remove Hamas from Gaza, which will not come easy. It will come at the cost of invasion and fighting and death on both sides. But I think Israel understands now that it has no alternative choice. It has to live. So that's the background I'm coming out of. I did one more comment. This Saturday, I think someday maybe they'll call it Milchemet Shmini Atzeret, Milchemet Simchat Torah, as they talk about Milchemet Yom Kippur, the war in 1973 that almost brought Israel to its knees. This war, and it's very striking that our enemies pick these days. They pick a day like Shabbat and Shmini Atzeret because they understand that on such days, Jews are spending time in synagogue. Their guard is down. They are trying to focus on life and peaceful and connection to God rather than be fully alert. And that's why they pick these days to attack Jews. So that this day will go down as the equivalent of the Israeli 9/11 or the Israeli Pearl Harbor, meaning an enemy that you knew was there, that you were suspicious and worried about, managed to pull off a surprise attack that was devastating and that made you look weak and structurally very vulnerable. But in this case, as I say, the Israeli army is strong and is now coming back. So the first thing I would say simply is that it will be hard the weeks and days ahead. And I think there will be an attempt made to pressure Israel to not go through with the removal of Hamas. And I think it's very painful, but necessary. So that's the background of where I'm speaking from, where I'm coming from. And there will be pain and loss, and it's very heartbreaking when you see young men. Today, this morning, he was 27 years old, just the beginning of life, and a person of brilliant potential and future career and goodness and devotion. I mean, his officers and his soldiers spoke about him this morning. He was the first to put himself online, totally committed to the protection. So there will be more days and many suffering days, but I have great confidence that the Jewish people and the Israeli people will respond successfully as they have done for the past 75 years.
In watching the news, I'm sure you've watched international reporting. What have been how have you responded to how this story is getting reported and reacted to?
Well, again, it's really connected to the whole Palestinian question. To my, I would say, pleasant surprise, but somewhat to my surprise, the international community has been much more supportive in this case than it has been in the past. It's a very sad comment. It's Golda Meir's old comment that when Israelis are defeated or set back or killed, the world sort of is more considerate and more kind. And if they're not so nice. So to my pleasant surprise, there has been very strong international support. What I think should not surprise, but is disappointing, again, that the Palestinians, for the most part, in Gaza, of course, celebrated, including the cruelty and the abductions and the killing and the rape and so on. They were tormenting the kids that had been brought in as abductors. So I'm sorry to say that, and what even made me sorrier, that in Egypt or in Saudi Arabia, they haven't made the usual condemnations, but it's also clear that they haven't had either the guts or the capacity to condemn this properly, because they believe that their population is in fact sympathetic, if not totally supportive for what Hamas did. So it's a long way to go. It's a long way to go, and it's not easy. Nevertheless, I am pleasantly surprised by the international support. Now we'll see what happens next, because this has been the whole Palestinian story from day one. In my judgment, the Palestinian allies have not done them a favor. They have harmed them all the way through. The Palestinians made the fundamental mistake which the Arab nations did. They prioritized not building a Palestinian state, and they could have. Instead, they prioritized trying to undermine, destroy Israel, and replace it with a one-state, a Palestinian state. And of course, they failed, and Israel has gotten stronger and responsive in each case. So they got themselves deeper and deeper into the hole. In the 1970s, 70-80% of the Israeli population was ready to support two states. Basically, the continuing terror and delegitimation and boycott and divestment and so on destroyed the left in Israel, because people said, you're just naive, they're not going to ever make peace. The Palestinian ongoing support for terrorism has alienated and convinced at least 30-40% of the population that they'll never make peace, so I wouldn't trust them. So again, it's not too late. I still believe personally that if the Palestinians would, as it were, do tshuva, change their priority, understand that their goal is to have a decent life for themselves, that their goal is to create a society where they can live in peace instead of the kind of corrupt or tyrannical they have in Gaza and the corrupt they have in the West Bank. If they will set a priority to get new leadership, they set priority to build a decent society and a better life, they can win, I believe, eventually the trust of Israelis. People ask me, yeah, but now there's 500,000 settlers. It's true. But in my judgment, again, if there's a will to peace, and if they can convince the Israelis they can and want to live in peace, then the answer is the settlers can live on the West Bank and be citizens of Israel, just as Palestinians can live in Israel and be citizens of the state of Palestine. It could be a world model for open borders and for peace between people. But more than anything else, I'm not trying to deny that there are right-wingers. I'm not trying to deny that there are extremists or want to deny the Palestinians their second state. But I would say there's still a real, excuse me, there's a very serious real possibility of a two-state solution, but not now and not under the present lack of trust and respect, but out of a serious Palestinian national renewal and revival. And I think that possibility may come closer now if Hamas can be taken out of the picture. Don't forget, Hamas has a major influence. In fact, they in the last election, which was aborted, they won a majority on the West Bank, not just in Gaza. Now, they've alienated a lot of people and they've shown their tyranny in the meantime, but still. But Hamas from day one has been committed in its charter to destroy Israel. In fact, not just to destroy Israel, but in their charter is this famous or infamous surah from the Quran in which the end of days will not come until the tree says to the triumphant Islamists, behind me is the last Jew, and you can find them and kill them. So Hamas basically, in its charter, is committed not to destroy Israel, but to destroy Jews everywhere in the world. But instead of recognizing that, instead of saying bluntly, we support you, Palestinians, but we will not support you if you are going to be electing or supporting or voting for people who want to destroy the other side. Instead of doing that, they have basically fudged and pressured and begged, and of course pushed Israel as much as possible to try to come to some agreement or compromise, but you can't compromise. It wants to wipe you out. So that I hope now, after this experience, more of the world will be willing to take a hard-nosed and honest approach that says to the Palestinians, we're with you, we're for you, but only if you give up, or rather on condition that you give up your fantasies, your evil fantasies of wiping out Israel, and begin to work on creating a democratic state alongside Israel.
You've had the privilege of length of days, and that's included the privilege of seeing the creation of the State of Israel. What do you remember from your earliest memories of creation of the State of Israel? And then I'm going to follow it up with you as to what does it mean to you as a Jew now to live there?
I was a teenager when, in those years when Israel was being born. And my strongest memories there were, A, we went to lots of rallies, and B, we decided to raise money for the State of Israel. We did it with pushkas. We had these boxes like the famous J&F boxes. You would go onto the train. We took the train from, I lived in Brooklyn at the time, up and down the Borough Park and the West End line, and up and down Brighton Beach and the Brighton line. And you would get into the car, and you had, 2.5 minutes between stops. So as soon as the door closed, you had like 15, 20 seconds to make a quick spiel, and then you would go around, people would drop in money, and you collected from car to car. And my favorite, one of my friends invented it. When the door would close, he'd jump up and say, "Open the doors, open the doors." And of course, everyone looked up, they thought, what's the problem? He said, "Open the doors of Palestine to the Jewish immigrants and the Jewish people who need your help now to bring all these survivors of the war to this, to freedom and out of Cyprus and out of the detention camp." And again, of course, people dropped in quarters, dimes, $half, whatever, but it added up. So that is one of my strongest memories of that period. And of course, seeing and listening to the UN vote that confirmed that Israel would be recognized and legitimated by the United World, hearing that, I remember singing and dancing with groups afterward, as you see in those famous newsreels of the Israelis doing that. I remember all those things very clearly. I also remember the fear when there was invaded, just as I remember the 6-Day War. And people, of course, look back with the enormous, incredible victory and so on. But of course, what I remember most vividly, I was a rabbi and the whole congregation, it was the 3 weeks before the 6-Day War, when we were convinced the Holocaust is about to happen all over again, and in which Nasser said it will drive the Jews into the sea, in which the head of the Arab League said that this is a war that will finish the Jews, and so on. And of course, the outburst of joy, and in my judgment, overdoing it released messianic and other unrealistic visions in the Jewish community as well. But I still remember the overwhelming shock and joy. The 3 weeks we were desperately worried it's going to happen. It's going to happen, and nothing we can do to stop it, and the world seemed to be standing by. And then this incredible, 6-day victory. So again, we've lived through worse, and as I said, unlike the Yom Kippur War and unlike the 6-Day War, when the existential right of Israel to exist was being challenged, I think in this case we don't have that anymore, because that is the accomplishment of the 75 years.
I want to talk about you just used the word messianic and unrealistic expectations. Clearly, the country of Israel was recently amidst enormous turmoil within. with a government that has a strong messianic component. What would you say about this recent internal political crisis and the role of Messianism and your hopes for unity that will emerge now that the country is united?
It's a fair and important question, and let me start out by saying I'm a Messianist. This question reminds me of a dear friend, David Hartman, of blessed memory. He was my closest friend intellectually, spiritually in America before he made Aliyah. And I used to visit him, of course, whenever I went to Israel, and frequently. And particularly after the Six-Day War, he made Aliyah after the Six-Day War, inspired by what can happen. And then in the 70s, what happened in the Six-Day War is that it unleashed such an incredible emotional, and again, let me say the positive, even though it was difficult, people didn't want to talk about the Holocaust. The Holocaust was neglected. The Holocaust was ignored. And suddenly, it's like a dam burst after the Six-Day War. Elie was a friend. I remember in the 60s when I visited him, he was neglected, he was poor, he was struggling. He was a journalist who was paid as a stringer for each column because he couldn't make a living. No one wanted to hear about the Holocaust. And then after the Six-Day War, there's a tremendous opening up. And I think that was very important maturation. The flip side of that, again, after the Six-Day War, was that for certain religious Jews, particularly students of Rav Kook or his son, the great Rav Kook's son, Rav Yehuda Kook, who took one small side of his father's theology, and that was the theology of the messianic significance of the state, that the state really was the rebirth of the Jewish people's religion. It was going to enter a phase, this was the messianic phase, and therefore, unlike the predecessors who said Israel will accept partition and limited land, and many of the lands of biblical sites were in the Arab side. But again, realistically, because that's what they had to do, they accepted this, and the Jewish Zionist leadership, Ben-Gurion, they said, we can live with this and we'll make the best of it. And they did make an incredible best of it. But the Messianists, on the other hand, said, look, this is a sign from God. We should have gotten that land in the first place. This is a sign from God, the Messiah is on the way. We can take over the West Bank. We can recapture all the biblical sites. And again, in total ignoring, there were Palestinians living there who wanted to have their own country. In ignoring the international community was not ready to accept this. So my conversation with David Hartman, I had come, and so the Messianists, they forced, and little by little built the settlements, and they forced the government to support this, and little by little, their dreams became more and more total. David said to me, look, I'm an Orthodox rabbi, but I've come to realize that Messianism is a curse. He said it's going to be the death of us because they're willing to do things politically. They're pushing their way into places where it will be impossible to live together, and in which he believed that Israel would be forced into occupation and worse, which would be very damaging to its Jewish character and its moral character. So he said, I've been thinking about this a lot, and I came to the conclusion, I have to give up Messianism. He said, it's threats of poison. And I would argue, I said, David, I'm a very strong Messian, meaning I think Judaism's greatest contribution, that was second greatest. Everybody says monotheism is the Jewish contribution to the world civilization, but I say at least as influential, maybe more, is the Jewish dream of Tikkun Olam, of Messianism, that the world will be perfected. Don't settle for the world as is. We can and should and will overcome poverty and hunger and war and sickness. This is the Jewish Messianic dream, to overcome sickness, to overcome death, but that's for another session, another conversation. So I always felt Messianism was absolutely critical, but here's the main point. Judaism had this vision of utopia, turning the earth into a paradise, but it married it to the brit, the covenant, the partnership idea of God and humans, God and Israel, of humans with each other, of the generations with each other, in a realistic, step-by-step perfection of the world. Yes, you want to have a world that's totally overcome hunger, but you can do it by expanding agriculture, by increasing productivity. It takes generations and centuries, but if you work at it, you'll get there, and so on and so forth. So I said to David, I can't give up Messianism because I feel that's the power, that's the engine that drives the Jewish dream of perfecting the world. But I think it's got to be what I call a covenantal Messianism, responsible, realistic. I'll be happy to talk about it in some other time. I think that this partnership between God and humans, one of the great developments of Jewish religion was that in the biblical period, it's a partnership, but God doing all the heavy lifting. And the rabbis taught us, and I believe in our time it's happened the third time, that God has said, humans, you take responsibility, you take power. So a messianism wants humans take power, but that means they control themselves. That means they have checks and balances, so it's not abuse. So that kind of messianism, I feel, is life-giving. I don't blame Hartman. In fact, he said to me at one point, he said, you can go on talking messianism because you're living in America. It's a theoretical question, and it's a very beautiful thought. I'm living in the real world in Israel here, where these guys, they're messianists, they're serious, and they intend to act irresponsibly, as if God is going to step in and cover all their deficits and all their dangerous, reckless behaviors, and it's not going to happen. So that was to come back to your question, the internal split in Israel now is in part not just messianism, but it's extremists. And yes, one of the tragedies and challenges that all Jews must live with is that religion in Israel has flourished, but in the process of flourishing, the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox, have become more and more powerful and influential and overreaching. And in their desire, whether it's for draft exemption or for monopoly control of religion, they are basically anti-democratic and were prepared with Netanyahu to try to destroy the Supreme Court. And the second great danger is that the Zionists, religious Zionists, who historically were moderate and responsible and democratic, have been taken charge by extremists who again are prepared to be anti-democratic. So this was a major internal crisis, and it's not over yet. I believe what we saw in the incredible demonstrations and in their national uprising against the destruction of the judiciary's independence, what we saw was a kind of amazing statement of the power of democracy and how deeply rooted it is in the state of Israel. And I believe in the end this will win out. What I don't know for sure is whether this coalition, as long as it's in power, and it's got 3 years left, unless there's a breakdown, may try to push through all those judicial destruction that I spoke about. I can't predict. I believe it will not, because the resistance has been so powerful. But even if it does, I have great confidence that the majority, the vital majority, the vital center of the state of Israel will reassert itself and restore the democratic process, restore the judiciary. So this is the unfinished struggle right now in Israel. I think our enemies misread it to think that Israel is weak and they can take advantage. And I am worried if Hezbollah joins in now, it would put Israel much greater danger and much greater suffering than I see before us right now. So it's not a matter of casual. Nevertheless, I would say I think our enemies have misread it. The basic Jewish people's commitment to democracy, to humanity, to responsible politics, and to building a realistic ideal society. In fact, let me finish with that comment. I believe in Tikkun Olam, I believe the Jewish vision of Messianism is correct. But I think in the end, this is the genius of our religion. You build it one country at a time, one state at a time, one city at a time, And you build it step by step, not by reckless, not by tyrannizing over other groups, not by trying to grab everything, but by trying to literally step by step, improve it. And this is what I think will win out in the end. In the short term, and of course, it's very nerve-wracking, because when you have democracy, when you have change of power, it's possible that the system is manipulated, or the system goes off and it elects a person or a leader who is a threat, or who is not as committed to democracy and equality as he should be. So we are living through that, and there's no guarantees. So to me, it's fascinating. On the one hand, we're living through historic times. We're living through, I believe, biblical equivalent times, when the Jewish state is rebuilt, when the dream of 2,000 years is realized, when I think we find the fulfillment of prophecy, and God's presence is much more aware and much more vital. And on the other hand, it's in the real world, which means mixed motions, mixed motives, mixed participation by people, including people who go the wrong way. So it's a struggle and a challenge. So it's a famous joke, Chinese joke, may you not live in challenging, interesting times, because it's so threatening. To me, it's threatening, but it's also very promising. And I believe in the end, the Jewish people will show, both in Israel and in the world, will show their maturity and their responsibility. And they will show that they can work for Tikkun Olam without going out of control or destroying.
So in listening to your response around the theme of Tikkun Olam, of Messianism, I'm reminded that the initial context for this conversation was to anticipate your forthcoming book, The Triumph of Life. And you've done a good job kind of going to the core of your message of Judaism's unique contribution of hopefulness of a better world with a practical plan. And I do look, with Ari's help, to have time in person to unfold the triumph of life. But one last piece in terms of the answer you just provided, and that is you lived most of your life in America. In recent years, you've lived in Israel. My friend, Rabbi Levi Kelman of Kol Neshama, said that he moved to Israel because he wanted to be on the playing field rather than being a spectator to Jewish history. We, largely your audience, are outside of Israel. So a twofold question. What does it mean to you to be now, having chosen to live in Israel? In what ways is this the fulfillment of another aspect of your own Jewish life? And what's your guidance for us who are outside of Israel in terms of what we can and should do now to support Israel?
It's interesting. Looking back, this is hindsight, of course. In 1800, or when the modern Zionist movement began, as it were, there were really two major responses to the arrival of modern civilization. Now, modern civilization was a world revolution, certainly a revolution for the Jewish people, because it came to them and said, you can get out of the ghetto, you can get out of pariah status, you can become full citizens. This is not only going to liberate the world, you can join, really, the modernity offered all the Jewish dreams. You can overcome poverty through business. You can overcome hunger through technology. You can overcome sickness through medicine and science. So we're giving you a chance to have realistic, achievable messianic goals. All the things you dreamed of for 2,000 years, you can now do. But stop being Jewish and stop being in a ghetto. Join us and let's make the whole world perfect. That was the messianic. It was almost irresistible. There were two main Jewish responses to that offer. One response was the majority of the Jews. Let's upgrade Judaism. Let's join modern culture. It's great. It's a wonderful thing. No more pariah, no more victim, no more, you'll have be an equal citizen. Let's join it, but we want to stay Jewish. So what do you stay Jewish? You have to upgrade Jewish identity. You'll have to deepen Jewish knowledge and Jewish experience for the average person so that they can be at the same time full participants in this incredible new opportunity without losing the meaningfulness and the desire to be distinctively Jewish at the same time. Now, to achieve that, to put it bluntly, Judaism was performing in the ghetto in the minor leagues. The competition was not really there. The competition was outside. They were an enemy. They were persecutors. They were inferior. But here was a culture that was offering you some of the greatest dreams you ever had. Or sometimes I say it this way, it's a combination of democracy, liberalism, equality, the great values, combined with economic advance, social advance, better health. It was just an irresistible combination for most Jews. And the famous Yiddish expression, love is wonderful, but love with noodles is even better. So here, modernity was offering us love, all these wonderful ideals, and practiced on us when in the past we were denied these values, and noodles, a chance to get ahead economically, socially, and every other way. So Jews were overwhelmingly joined it, but thank God, a large number said, I don't want to give up being Jewish nevertheless. And so we worked on this, and this is what the denominations are about. How do you modernize Judaism enough to be able to stay Jewish and yet hold its own in the presence of an open, welcoming society? That's what made the denominations, and each one had their own particular solution. I also have to admit, there were large numbers of Jews who became secularists for the same reason, and there were a larger number of Jews who assimilated because they decided it's irresistible, but I don't want to be different. That was the largest selection of Jews. And of course, America particularly was the land of this opportunity and of this attempt. And the very small number in 1800, it was probably between 2 and 4% of the Jewish people said, no, there's an alternative way to deal with this. Not to join the general society, because in the end, there's going to be anti-Semitism. They're not going to give you full participation. The way to do it is to create a Jewish nation again. Go to Israel. But what does it mean to go to Israel and build a homeland? It really means that the religion will community, as by the way, most religions are, by majority population being Jewish, by a calendar that's national Jewish, by a language, Hebrew, that is Jewish, and so on. In other words, the solution they saw was to create a majority in which the country passed on the Jewish identity by propinquity, by being in the Jewish majority, by having the culture give it to you and take it for granted. You might say, it wasn't even, the quality was not the issue, but rather just to create this. Now, of course, it was a wild idea. And the truth, as I said, maybe 25 to 50,000 people in the first two Aliyot, whereas millions went to America and to South America, Argentina, in search of this integrated Jewish identity and a better life. So those were the two challenges. The paradox, of course, is that the Zionist idea worked better. It's now 150, 200 years later. And yes, Israel has become 50% of the world Jewish population. It's become the most powerful Jewish power in the world, economy in the world, and so on and so forth. So it has been a highly successful. The catch, of course, again, is that it's not having to face the same intellectual, cultural, spiritual challenges that American or diaspora Jewry is, because we're a minority in America. So speaking for myself, Judaism, it was the most important thing in my life. So I, in a way, dreamt of, my wife and I talked about Aliyah before we got married, which was 66 years ago. We talked about it. And in fact, when David Hartman, I mentioned, made Aliyah in 1969, 68, after the Six-Day War, I said to him, David, I want to make Aliyah too. I'll join you in a few years. But before I go, I just want to make sure we create some structures in America to help American Jewry face this unfinished challenge of maintaining Jewish values, Jewish ideals, Jewish identity inside the culture, and not, as the Haredim have done it, in a kind of creating a new ghetto. So again, in fact, I said to him, give me 5 years and I'll join you in Israel. Well, of course, 5 years I did. I started CLAL. I did all kinds of things for pluralism, to bring the denominations together, to raise Jewish education, which I still think is the key. If you want to have an integrated but high quality Jewish identity, you have to have much more Jewish learning, much more Jewish experience. That's why I'm a big fan of our County Community Scholar Program, because again, it means that the average person, not just rabbis, the average, not just the academic scholar of Judaism, will have to be knowledgeable. I believe we have to offer more religious and intellectual experiences so that every Jew, as it were, will become a major intellectually, spiritually fulfilled Jew, and that is the key for the future. So the truth is, I kept trying. After 5 years, it took 5 years to start CLAL, and even then it was far from there. I saw there's so much to be done. So I kept putting it off. And it reminds me of the old joke. It's a somewhat bitter joke, but not bitter. No, the Chassid, he's the world's largest chicken farmer, and his chickens start to die from mysterious disease, and he doesn't know what to do. And he tries all the veterinarians, all the scientists, nothing helps, and it's dying. It's down to 500,000 chickens now. And he doesn't know. Finally, he decides, we'll go to the Rebbe. Maybe the Rebbe can help him. Goes to Rebbe. He said, my chickens are dying. I've tried every agricultural and scientific approach. Nothing has worked. Can you help me, Rebbe? He said, oh, well, sure. If you look at the Talmud in such a place, it gives you a wonderful recipe for a cure. Use it. So he uses it, comes back a month later, Rebbe, half my chickens died. It didn't help. What I should do? Help me. He says, well, look here in the Torah, in this section, if you will read it the special way, it gives you a special cure. He uses it. Well, he comes back. Rebbe says, I'm down to my last 50,000 chickens, and still. Rebbe says, well, I have one more Hasidic cure, and he gives him the Hasidic cure. Comes back a month later and says, Rebbe, all my chickens died. Rebbe says, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. I had so many wonderful cures for you to give you, but if this one didn't work. Now, so when I say that is that every 5 years I sort of came up with another idea how we can strengthen the Jewish people in America. Birthright Israel and programs of this type was a wonderful challenge, but of course, the chickens kept dying. Namely, the challenge of assimilation has not been met. It still needs a lot of attention. So the truth is, I delayed. What broke the logjam for me personally, my wife, was that our children, 2 of them had made Aliyah before. We had 12 grandchildren in America and 11 in Israel. And then our oldest son, who lived in America, had 7 grandchildren, made Aliyah. Suddenly we had 19 grandchildren in Israel and 5 in America. So we moved. I must say, I felt even a little guilty. I didn't want it to be interpreted that we're abandoning America, and we're not. And I still believe that despite the assimilation and despite the surge in intermarriage and such forms of assimilation that it lead to disaffiliation, nevertheless, I still believe American Jewry has the capacity, and this is what we're all working on. So now, in fact, in that capacity, I believe Israel can be a tremendous help. It's not a guarantee of anything, but Israel, the life is so rich. And I mean just the religious life, the secular life of Israel is so rich. When we take people in birthright, last year was 50,000 people. We've had a cutback because of economics and because of the COVID. But nevertheless, when you're reaching half your clientele, your age cohort, and I believe we should get to 100%, when you take them to Israel, we find that they're not just moved by the wall or by Masada. We find that they're equally moved and excited by Tel Aviv nightclubs because they see a living Jewish vitality. They see a society that is culturally, musically, in every other way productive and exciting, and movies. And this becomes part of for them that Judaism is not just an intellectual or even a limited spiritual vision. It's a whole lifestyle and a whole lifespan. So that my answer to your question in part is that while we made Aliyah, We remain deeply interested in the American scene, and not only because we have grandchildren here, but more important because we believe that that is an important unfinished historical task, to raise Jewish culture and identity to such levels that Jews can live freely and successfully integrated among a majority society. And Jews can be and should be, in my judgment, a model of this combination of distinctive identity, rich particular culture and heritage, mixed with universal commitment and moral responsibility. I think the Jewish community can be a major model for all of America in this area, and it's an unfinished job. So my personal answer is each person should go to Aliyah when they feel the grandchildren or other needs, but they should not go to Aliyah giving up on America, quite the contrary. America remains a major opportunity and a major challenge historically to revitalize and to renew the Jewish religion, which is still struggling. And we've had amazing development. We've had many cultural and denominational upgrades, and we've also had much assimilation. And this is an unfinished challenge, but I think the opportunity is there.
Thank you. I'm going to now turn it over to Ari to field some of the questions from the participants who've been listening, withholding my last question, the privilege of the last question, and that is, I'll tell you what it'll be. It'll be on a practical dimension, going forward where you began, with yet much fighting and loss and challenge ahead. Practically, what should we be doing? But for now, Ari, some opportunity to share some of your thoughts and the questions that have emerged.
I've been monitoring questions here, but also over the last few days, so I'll try to bring in some. Please feel free to put your questions in the chat if you haven't had a chance. I guess one question that I've seen come up a lot is, and since you, Rabbi Greenberg, are very involved, I think, in high-level work with spiritual leaders in other faiths, people, I've seen a lot on social media, and I just want to know if you agree or disagree. People seem very upset that they haven't heard support from other spiritual communities for the Israelis that have been murdered and what's happened. So my question is, have you heard from people? Do you see that? Have you also noticed that, or is that something that we've just missed? But it seems that that has been a comment I've seen a lot lately in the last few days. Where's the rest of the spiritual world on this issue and what's happened in Israel?
Yeah, well, let me just start by saying I joined the dialogue in part as a response to the Shoah, to the Holocaust, because the Holocaust to me represented, the Nazis, of course, did the dirty work and did the magic extermination, but I felt that they exploited the history of Christian anti-Semitism and the way which injected itself into Western civilization and in secular as well as religious forms was the background the Nazis exploited. So from my point of view, I joined the dialogue bluntly to say not to get love and affection, but to tell Christians stop spreading hatred because it's a threat to me and my children, my grandchildren, and my people. I did join, and I will say, taken aback, that's one thing I'll say in self-defense, at least I listened. I discovered thousands of Christians who were as upset as I was by the history of Christian anti-Semitism, who were as determined as I was and more to purify their religion and cut out this supersessionism, the claim that Judaism was replaced, supersessionism, the claim that Judaism is a Pharisaic and legalistic and unalive religion. They were prepared to totally repent. And I should say again, for the record, this whatever will come to the moment about standing by Israel. The bottom line is the Catholic Church in particular, by the way, which has put out statements, the Catholic Church went through a world transformation. It's one of the great religious transformations of history, repudiating 2,000 years of deicide charge, 2,000 years of church fathers who preached the synagogue of Satan was the Jewish synagogue and so on. And I think they're not the only ones. They were in Protestant and other groups, particularly in the West. There was a major transformation. And that accomplishment, I think, to me, is a major contribution. First of all, to remove, they have stopped being the source of anti-Semitism. And they have become a major force of support for Jews, and yes, for the state of Israel. Now, it's also true, it's not simple. It's not simple. For example, Islam, much less dialogue. Israel was much less open. They didn't feel guilty, whatever the reasons are. And Islam has a much more powerful, extreme, radical wing that's anti-Israel, anti-Jewish, and so it's gone much more slower. And there are we were involved with Buddhism and Dalai Lama and so on. So each one in their own pace. Now, I will say this. I think it's true that after 67, after 20 years or 15 years of dialogue, we were shocked at how quiet they were in those weeks when Israel was threatened with destruction. And I think afterward, we spent more time talking about Israel and getting more support. I think that's true now, too. There has been, on the other hand, some erosion, particularly in the left and the left-wing churches, in terms of the Palestinians and the whole problem of radical leftism, which anti-colonial, whatever the excuses are, identity politics. So there's a lot of work to be done. But I will say again, number one is the dialogue is not just to get support. The dialogue in the end was a vision, which I think is the original Jewish vision, that religion should be a force for life, for love, for responsibility, and that someday Jerusalem and someday God's Torah will be a house of prayer for all people, meaning not they'll all become Jewish, but that they will learn to live in respect and help and support each other. So I don't know the specifics of now. I haven't done a measurement of the internet, but I would argue that we should not be discouraged. We have to step up more responsibility and more interaction and more influence, because I believe where we do have serious dialogue, we do get not only support, but we get a new model of religious respect and cooperation that can help move the world away from conflict and civil war and religious extremism.
One last question from me, then we'll have Rabbi Spitz wrap it up, given our timing.
So
You've achieved so much in your life, and thank God it's been a long life for you and Blue. And yes, I remember having you in the community. It was our honor to have you in person here, and we hope to have you back on your new book, which is coming out, I guess, in August, as you mentioned. So if you're in Orange County, California, we hope to have Rabbi Greenberg here in person. But you worked on CLAL, you worked on Birthright, you've done so many things. Is there any one thing that keeps you up at night that you didn't do, that you wanted to do, or you haven't done yet?
Well, what keeps you up at night again is it's an unfinished challenge. Let me rephrase that. In my book, I argue this at great length. We're living through not only a great historical period of Jewish history. I mean, in my lifetime, in the last century, the greatest act of redemption of Jewish history, comparable to the Exodus, which is the heart and the cause of the biblical Torah and the Jewish vision of redemption. We've had an event of redemption equal in size, greater in size, the state of Israel recreating and bringing home millions of Jews from exile. We've had in my lifetime the greatest act of destruction, greater than the destruction of the Second Temple and the greatest exile of Jewish history. In my lifetime, one lifetime. Now I tell people, after the Exodus, we created the Bible. We became the people of the world. After the destruction of the temple, we created the Talmud. And Rabbinic Judaism was born, a new iteration of our own religion, equally powerful, equally influential, but quite in much greater level of human responsibility. So my personal answer is, we're living through times where I ask, after the Exodus and the Korban come together in one generation, what will we create? So my answer is, what keeps you up at night is the Jewish people has a moment where it should, I believe it's happening, just slowly and maybe not fast enough. A third iteration of Judaism is being born. It's a more secular, it's a more universal, but I believe it is no less distinctively Jewish. And our responsibility in this period is to take power and to show a model of how to use power to create a good society and a just society. That's our main challenge. And that challenge to me keeps me up at night because it's an unfinished challenge. And because, in my judgment, it's not just a challenge in the state of Israel, which must learn to use its power with restraint and responsibility and make room for the lives of others and for the dreams of others, but no less important in America. I think we can be a model of how you can influence a broader society. We can be a model of how you can be within America, a particular community that's responsible, that welfare and justice and help to itself and to others, and for the state of Israel. So my answer is that's what keeps you up at night, the Jewish people's unfinished mission. I think this could be the beginning of the greatest area of Jewish history. It will take a renaissance, and all of us raising our game as Jews, but I think that's the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you. I just want to pass on one. Rabbi Joan Sachs says she remembers meeting with your wife, Blue Greenberg, years ago, and she said that one day there will be Orthodox female rabbis. So, people should know that what we get with you is a couple. It's not just you; it's you and your wife, and how much you've influenced the Jewish world. So I want to thank you both.
It's a fair point, but I will say again, that's a good example too. And there is a my judgment, and this is something that the Orthodox learned from the others. That this is an age in which women's full dignity is being pushed, not just in the Jewish community, as never before. I wanted to learn from them. My wife wants to learn from them, and similarly. So this is the point. This is an age of great LGBTs. This is the period when disabled, the period when the people of color who have been neglected for all these years or persecuted have now asserted their dignity. So it's a chance for amazing breakthroughs down the line. And my wife has been we're very proud of her work in that area. But it reminds me of a joke when she published that idea that we weren't Orthodox rabbis in 1982. Of course, at the time, no one believed it. And I remember before she sent it into the publisher, she said, "Would you please read this and give me a reaction?" And I read it, and of course, I loved it. Because the argument said there's no halachic religious objection, there's really social issues, but it will happen. And she finished by saying, I predict in my lifetime that there were women Orthodox rabbis. I was so excited. I ran upstairs, her studies on the second floor. I ran up I said, I hugged, I said, do you realize what you just wrote? She said, what? I said, we're going to live forever. Anyway, so of course it turns out we're not going to live forever. It also turns out that it happened in my lifetime, and that's just a small example. But again, it's a challenge to me. If they can be one Orthodox rabbis, they can. She learned that from Reform and Conservative, by the way. Then it seems to me Reform and Conservative can learn from the Orthodox to raise their game, to raise their intensity, to raise their experiences. And so we learn from each other and we upgrade each other, and that could be part of the Jewish Renaissance that I'm talking.
So I will just share what a privilege it is, all the more in this time of disorientation because of the horror of these last days, to sit with you, our teacher, our friend, Rabbi Yitz, and to celebrate with you and Blue your privilege of living in Israel amidst this challenge. And so closing, what's for us who are outside the land of Israel, what's your Eitz Tova? What's your guidance for us as to how we can meaningfully matter in these coming days? And you'll have the last word as our rabbi. And again, my last word is thank you.
I will say again, American Jews, first of all, America's support for Israel has been indispensable. It's really in the Yom Kippur War was the difference between destruction and coming back in the age of the victory, thanks to American supply. So American support is absolutely the most important thing. And American Jewry, my answer is by your support, by your commitment, by the conviction that you share with the rest of the American public, so that the American public really overwhelmingly believes in the righteousness of Israel's cause and the importance and significance of its existence. So my answer is keep doing that, deepen it, study more. Now, again, it's more complicated. The press is less sympathetic. There are all kinds of criticism. My answer is, do you have to study and read? Again, you have to be sophisticated. And you have to be better. In my judgment, as I said, the left and the press have been much less responsible and much less realistic in their criticism of Israel. There's room for criticism. And I think, again, American Jewry can communicate to Israel that we want you to be responsible and restrained. We want you to make room for others to the extent that you can. But it can't be ignoring direct threat and ignoring terrorism and ignoring the one-sided and unjust attacks on Israel. So it's a combination of not only following and studying and communicating and supporting America, but it means in that way assuring Israel's support that it needs for its future. I'd also add that psychologically and humanly, the knowledge of the support and of the caring of the world Jewry is a major factor in Israelis' public resilience and its capacity to take setback and difficulty and meet it. So again, don't underestimate your own role. That means not only being connected to Israelis, visiting regularly, living here, sending children to study here, sending children on birthright experiences to live, to be here and make friends with Israelis. That's also a big part of the picture. So yes, it also means reading, I think of Noah Tishby's book on Israel. So you will really have a realistic and honest portrait of Israel. Warts and all, it is the most remarkable country. It is in the best of the Jewish values and the best American values. And like all great democracies and like all great religions, it has flaws and has weaknesses. And as I mentioned before, in this present struggle judicial, some of the more negative forces in Israeli society have come to power. So I'm not saying it's easy, but I think you can become aware of it. You can help strengthen the good side. You can help communicate to all Israelis that they should remain in the responsible, centrist, and moderate position. So this is all part of the thing we do together. So I'll finish by simply saying again, it is one of the great, this people has, in my lifetime, come back from the greatest catastrophe and death and destruction in its history with the greatest outburst of life, of renewal, of love. 80% of the living scholars of Torah and rabbis in the world in 1939 were dead by 1945 because 90% of them lived in Europe. There are more rabbis, more students full-time of Torah now in the world and in Israel, but in America also, than ever before in Jewish history. So it's an amazing comeback. And that, to me, strengthens the Jewish message, which we should be teaching the whole people. We have to go on showing the model of how life is stronger than death. That's our Torah's teaching. How every act of life can be a choice of life, whether that's how you eat, how you talk, how you behave in relation to other people, should be a choice of life. So that is the unfinished opportunity for American Jewry and for Israeli Jewry to show in a society at large or as a minority within a society, a model of a community that's committed to life, to love, responsibility, that struggles but tries to exercise power with restraint and justice. This is the unfinished task. And again, I appreciate I've lived a long time. I'm not sure I will live to see the end and the fulfillment of this, but I leave it to you, Elie, and to the next generation and the generation after that, to see the opportunity and to create a model that is not only vital and alive and working in America as well as in Israel, but really, I think, could be a living light for the whole world. Anyway, I look forward to that continuing responsibility and continuing partnership between world Jewry and Israel and the whole Jewish people and the world.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi Greenberg. Thank you, Rabbi Spitz. Thank you all for joining us today. And we'll do our best to keep you informed. There's lots of other avenues to learn about what's going on. We'll try to share those with you as well. And look forward to learning more with you over the next few weeks, months, and years at CSP. Take care, everybody. Be safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. All the best, Yitz. Be well.
Thank you all.
Keep safe, everybody. Be well.